Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk with Alain Hunkins, and he is a sought-after leadership speaker, a consultant, a trainer, and a coach. His recent book, Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders, launched as the #1 best-selling new release in business communication on Amazon. I love what someone said that it was on his LinkedIn, said that it is one of the most practical books on the planet when it comes to leadership and how to make a difference. Wow, that says a lot because there are a lot of leadership books out there. So with his 20-year career, I know he's going to have lots to share with us here. Alain, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation. We're excited to have you.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I'm really excited to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And thank you to, I always like to give a shout out for the people that make this happen. So Tom Schwab from Interview Valet connected us, and I get so many leadership consultants that ask to be on the show, and for most, because there's so many of them, I just have to turn a lot of them away or refer them to somebody else that I know that has a podcast talking about leadership. But I specifically wanted to interview you because of your experience, your success, and the fact that you go a level deeper into this conversation. So let's start off with, first of all, kind of back up. You're very passionate about leadership. You've been focusing on it for many years. What caused you to be passionate about leadership in the first place?
Sure, happy to share that. So yeah, you talk about wanting to go deeper. So we'll kind of go deep right here, right now into this. So I think a lot of it has to do with, it's funny, where you end up when you're 5 years old, you don't think, I'm going to be a leadership consultant often. Like, no. But if I had to look at the through line, I've always been really fascinated by people, and specifically why people do what they do and how certain people, AKA leaders, shape the experience of other people's experience of life. And I think the first organization that we're all a part of is our family. So for me, growing up, I had a fairly unique experience. Now at the time, I didn't think it was unique because it was all I knew. So I grew up in New York City, not unique, raised by a single mom, not unique, and my grandmother, also not unique. The unique part is the fact that my mother and my grandmother are both Holocaust survivors. My mother was 5 or 6 years old when the Nazis invaded Belgium, and they're Jewish. And my mom spent from 6.5 until 9.5 in hiding. Her mother was, put her in hiding at the age of 6.5. And then they were reunited after the war. My grandmother was in a concentration camp, was liberated. The rest of the family was killed. Horrific experience. They were reunited, and those are my primary parents. As
Wow.
you can imagine, Nicole, that completely shaped their worldview and also how they thought about trust or lack thereof, about what do you say to whom. And so I had this vibe at home that was so different from growing up in the 1970s in New York City public schools and my friends and their families. So I think part of this journey of fascinating and the subtle nuances of human behavior have been with me like ever since I was born, frankly. So that's really what got me interested in this. I studied psychology in undergrad, as well as kind of dabbled in a lot of different things. I studied theater, because I think part of it was trying to learn about other people through the dramatic character. So, and then when you study acting, I went to acting conservatory, you put yourself under the microscope. So you literally have to pick your behavior apart and put it back together. So I think all of these things ended up morphing into this interest in behavior. I got involved doing educational training, doing leadership in junior high schools and high schools. And then a friend of mine said, do you want to come and check out this corporate training thing? I went, sure. And then I went, oh, these are people too. And these are people trying to work together. So that was 25 years ago. And so it's been a winding road that has led me to where I am. And the through line has always been, why do people do what they do?
Wow. That's quite a perspective that you get on life. And that's just, what do you say with that kind of thing? I always love hearing the stories because there's always a story behind it. Yeah. And so you bring something unique to this conversation of leadership. And it kind of makes me think about like how I grew up and why I'm passionate about leadership is why, because I saw great leaders and I saw really bad leaders, and in a different context than you, but it's just that desire to see how we can do it better and how we can make greater difference,
Yeah.
the ability that we have as leaders at all levels to influence others. It's very powerful. So let's talk about your book,
Mhm.
Cracking the Code.
Yeah.
So what's the code?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, if you think about most of us, and most of us listening probably got into leadership because you were seen as a high performer, right? And got stuff done. And the fact is, though, there's a huge gap between being a high performer and facilitating high performance in others, right? And most of us who got into these roles, we mean well. We're these high performers who got stuff done. We mean well, and yet we have this overall drive to get stuff done. So what ends up happening is we end up valuing efficiency over effectiveness. And so the fact is, if you look at all the research and the data, is that we have an epidemic of lousy leadership. I mean, I'll just share a couple of stats that many people might be familiar with. 85% of people are not engaged at work, right? 51% of employees don't trust their employers. Only 12% strongly agree that their leaders have the right mindset to lead into the future. So, what is going on? So for me, and the book wasn't like I sat down. Again, I'm not an author per se. I've worked with thousands of teams over years. So for me, I started seeing patterns of behavior, seeing patterns of what great leaders did well, and seeing patterns of what lousy leaders did lousy. And I started taking notes, and the notes turned into blog posts, and the blog posts turned into chapters. And so what I found was there were these three main themes, which are now the subtitle of the book, The Three Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. These three themes that all effective leaders needed to do well, which is connection was number one, number two was communication, and number three was collaboration. Because what I see is, so many of these leaders, we mean well, we're working hard, but working harder isn't going to get you there. And so we need what I call a facilitative mindset, right? So the idea is if we want to facilitate high performance in others, we as leaders need to know how to achieve performance goals easier, which takes this mindset, which is this set of beliefs. So I'm big on beliefs because without having the right beliefs, you can give people all the prescriptive how-to tools and they won't stick, right? So looking at what are your beliefs, what are the things that are getting in your way of effective leadership, and then taking a look at the skill sets. And to me, you can break connection, communication, and collaboration down into their component discrete parts. And that's where you can learn some practical, simple tools. And I'm happy to talk about some of those practical tools that you can start to apply that will help you to achieve performance goals easier. Let's face it, our world is super complex right now, and people don't need more, and more. It's actually what they need is smarter, smarter, smarter.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times people will come to me and say, because I coach people, and they'll say, what do I need to do more of? And I say, well, first of all, the question I think that is more important is what do you need to do less of so that you can actually have the capacity. There's lots of reasons for that, right? There's the capacity, but also looking at eliminating the things that aren't working before you start adding more things on. So yeah. Now, when you talk about the barriers and why people don't, I mean, we know like there's so much information. There is so much information about leadership. Leaders, for the most part, know what they're supposed to do, but you talk about beliefs that's why they're part of the reason why they're not doing it. So how do you get them to, they take your program, watch you, let's say you speak for them at their company. How do you get them to go from, that's really interesting, Alain, thank you for sharing. And I'm going to do something about that. And the self-awareness to realize that they actually need to do something about it. I mean, I've had leaders that say, I'm a really good leader, saying, oh, okay, awesome. Do you mind if I actually, get some feedback on that, right? Like, let's find out what your team says. Yeah. And usually it's a very different result. And oftentimes the great leaders are the ones that say, I don't know, I wouldn't say that I'm working on it. I'm getting better, because they're honestly saying, I'm not arrogant enough to say that I'm all that and more.
Yeah. Oh, you totally nailed it. I mean, the fact is, it all starts with this awareness. I mean, I know this is Leaders of Transformation. For me, transformation means you can't change, right? If transformation is the biggest word for change, you can't change what you don't notice. And I think so many leaders are blind to their own blindness. And the reason they are that way is because if you're in charge, there's no downside to not asking your people. If you feel like I'm good enough, I'm a good leader, I'm good enough, and I don't have to change anything, then you won't. Then you are done. So don't even bother. But if you feel that you actually think you could be better, then you have to take the courage, and it does take courage, to take an honest look in the mirror, as well as, like you said, ask for the feedback of, hey, where could I get better? Hear that feedback, say thank you, and then start to take some steps moving forward. So for me, it's really taking a look at what are the beliefs that you have inherited. And I talk about this in the book, and I talk about this when I work with people, is so many of our leaders today, again, very high performer doers. But the doer mindset means you think you need to fix something. And being a leader is not the same as being a fixer. I'll share a story, a friend of mine named Matt, that kind of brings the whole facilitative mindset to life. So Matt is the #1 top-ranked district manager for a national franchise, #1 out of 100. Now, when Matt started, he was not a high-performing leader. In fact, when he started, he was like number 84 out of the list, really not strong. And he said, when I started, he said, I thought I had to be this fixer. And they used to get these performance metrics every morning called the hot list. And he'd look for what was in red, and not measuring up. And he'd run around from store to store and tell the store manager, this is wrong, fix this, do this, do this, do this. And he did that for years, and he went nowhere, because he was trying to fix stuff. He said, I think I hit bottom the day I realized there were people on my teams who were quitting, and I didn't even know what their names were, right? Because he was so tactical and so task-oriented. So he shifted his approach. So he went, oh, these are people. And so he'd come into the store, he'd start saying, hey, Nicole, how was your weekend? How are you? Like treating you like a person. And again, I know that sounds like common sense, but it gets lost in the shuffle of the busyness of task mode. And then he'd still have his hot list with his list of things that were wrong, but he wouldn't say, this is wrong, do this. He'd say, hey, Nicole, here's the list, here's the data. What do you think we should do? Right? So he leads by listening, and he's now facilitating and getting people's ownership and buy-in and engagement. And then together they create the action plan. He said he realized that the big shift happened, that the key to hitting the numbers was to stop focusing on the numbers and start focusing on the people. Right? Because it was the people that were delivering the numbers. And so I think it's this mindset shift of going, actually, my first job is to be a leader of people. It isn't that I work in the tech industry or pharma industry or manufacturing. It's I'm actually leading people. That is my primary role. And that is such an important mindset that gets overlooked. So that's where I start with people. And I ask them to take a self-assessment, and I ask them to get some honest feedback. And if they aren't interested in all those things, they can work with somebody else, because it's a waste of time. I mean, really, I've been doing this too long to go, like, as you know, as a coach, if people are not coachable, it's a waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that story. And unfortunately, there's a lot of leaders that actually get into, and I think about Matt, for example, he probably thought that the reason why he was hired, the reason why he was promoted was because of his smarts and his intelligence and ability to get results, versus realizing that he's in a people business, and without the people, the product doesn't move itself, and or the customer experience is not going to be a favorable, and if you don't take care of your people. So really, really powerful. So let's talk about, we're in the midst of COVID right now.
Yeah.
And leaders who thought, okay, I kind of got it worked out. I know what I'm doing. Yeah. Just got totally uprooted. They're now at home, many of them still at home, kids running around behind them, dogs, cats, all these different things. And where they I have one of my clients, for example, always had a suit on and everything. And now he's got the t-shirt and so forth. Yeah. It's a totally different environment.
Yeah.
How has leadership changed, or how have some of these tools that you provide become even more important right now?
Yeah. Yes and yes. The fact is, things have shifted. I mean, talk about transformation. This year has been change on steroids, right? So it's like, woof, like everything. And how many sacred cows have been slaughtered? All those, oh, we can never have our people work from home. We can never do this. Well, guess what? I guess you can. If necessity is the mother of invention, she has been birthing overtime this entire year. Everyone's making stuff up. So to me, the principles become that much more important. The connection, communication, collaboration. And the fact is, this COVID pandemic is revealing all of the weak spots. So if there were things that you were weak in, it's really showing up. That basically, without clear intention. So for example, if you didn't connect with your people in person, that is going to be magnified by what's going on right now. Now, if you were a great connector, you were probably already thinking, how can I connect with people in the virtual space? What do I need to do? How do I need to shift? Right? Which is, again, is a mindset thing first. But yeah, these principles become that much more important. And we have to get a whole lot more creative about how we deal with it, because so many of the structural things we had in place that we just assumed, like our commute time or going into an office or being able to go down the hall and say, hey, Nicole, I got a quick question for you. Suddenly I have to schedule this somehow. How do I manage what used to be spontaneous? So leaders need to be that much more intentional. I think a big part of becoming a transformational leader is being conscious of how you do what you do, right? It's that process, and because people are good at a lot of things, but they can't read your mind. And so what do we do to be really clear and make the implicit explicit with people? It's so important. So yeah, all of the skills have become that much more important for sure.
And earlier you actually talked about common sense, right? Asking
Yeah.
people, how are you? And I
Yeah.
think of some of the things that are common sense
Yeah.
that we take for granted. And maybe even as leaders, we think, doesn't everybody know this? I'm
Yeah.
guilty of that all the time, thinking, doesn't everybody know this? And then
Yeah.
I realize, no, they don't. And you need to work with them, with your team, and
Yeah.
be able to have empathy. And I know you talk about empathy,
Yeah.
the importance of that, to have empathy for where people are at, especially
Yeah.
right now, where
Yeah.
everybody is in upheaval and uncertainty and fear of,
Yeah.
getting COVID, fear of
Yeah.
losing their job, fear of for their families, all of these different things. And of course, then we're not even going to talk about the politics that's going on right now.
Yeah.
So all of this and being able to have empathy for people and still, stay focused on performance and the results
Yeah.
that they're accountable for to the
Exactly.
shareholders and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about how
Yeah.
that balance and how to employ that empathy in an effective way?
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, the fact is, and I looked the word up in the dictionary because I think what we're dealing with is, and the word is trauma. And if you look up the word trauma in the dictionary, it says a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. I think we'd agree that this pandemic qualifies, right? So we're dealing with trauma, and there's all sorts of different responses people have to trauma. And one of the most important things that can help people through trauma, because we've heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, there's also post-traumatic growth syndrome, right? Which is the idea is that some people are resilient and grow and get stronger from adversity. So how can we as leaders help? Well, one of the most important things we can do is to, what psychologists call it, it's a fancy word, normalize, which basically make people feel okay. It's okay that you don't feel okay. Like, it's okay that, please don't apologize that your baby just woke up during a Zoom call, because this is crazy times and you're dealing with it. So it's so important that leaders need to set the tone, because if we don't acknowledge that, people have this stress of like, is this okay? Oh, how am I going to deal with this? So getting to empathy, right? So first of all, just to do some level setting, I define empathy as showing people that you understand them and care how they feel, which clearly normalizing is a piece of that. Hey, how are you today, Nicole? Is everything okay? How are you coping with this? How's your family, right? So showing people you understand. And I think we get the fact that on a human level, that's important, because empathy is hardwired into us. That's the good news. The bad news is, while we feel empathy for people we care about, we only feel it for the people that we deem are in our empathy circle. So loved ones, family, great close friends, they make the cut. But people who are, let's call them strangers or less close ties, may not make the cut. So as leaders, we have to realize what are the things, particularly in a work setting, that are going to keep us from empathizing. I mean, we talked earlier about that kind of knowing doing gap. There was a great study that came out a couple of years ago where 92% of CEOs said, oh yes, our organizations are empathetic. And they asked all the employees in those organizations, are your CEOs empathetic? And they said about 50% were. So this huge gap. So what makes leading with empathy so hard? Well, you mentioned the fact that we have results to deliver. And I think one of the biggest barriers to empathy is patience or lack thereof. Because let's face it, showing people that you understand them and care how they feel isn't something you can just check off your to-do list. Okay, how are you feeling, Nicole? Done. You can't just do that, right? So showing people empathy means showing patience. And people are so overworked, overloaded. I mean, we've been talking about doing less with more with less for years now, right? I mean, we are already running as close to the bone as we can. And now throw COVID on top of that in the middle of all this. I mean, people are stressed. And we have this drive, we've got to hit the numbers and drive for results. Now, it's great to drive for results, but it shouldn't come at the cost of driving over people who are trying to deliver those results. So part of this leadership wisdom is, there's a time and a place to go fast, and there's a time and a place to go slow. And maybe, just maybe, especially in larger organizations, do we have to press pause on this year's outlook, what we're projecting, and going, you know what, maybe we have to rethink our metrics for what we're doing. Because by the way, there's this huge trauma and crisis going on that might impact some things. So for us to get realistic about doing something different. So empathy, so that's one of the big barriers. And the other big barrier to leading with empathy is a lot of people in the workplace are uncomfortable around other people's feelings, right? It's like, ugh. I mean, I certainly grew up in the age where I remember hearing people say things like, oh, you check your feelings at the door here. We have a check your feelings at the door policy, right? We don't talk, this is work. We don't do feelings here. So especially for older generations. Now, Gen Y, Gen Z, much more open, transparent. I mean, I have a sister who's 14 years younger than me, and the things that she posts on her Facebook are like, I'm like, wow, Joe, you are so much more like, okay, like that's not what me and my friends do, right? I'm 52, we don't go. However, what we realize around this thing about feelings in the workplace is you can't actually check your feelings at the door. What you do is you suppress your feelings at the door, which is exactly what's going on. And Deloitte did this great study a few years ago. He found that 61% of the US workforce puts on a mask. I don't just mean a physical mask, I mean a metaphorical mask. They feel like they've got to fake it. They've got to cover their identity in some way because they feel like if they show up truly as who they are, that something bad will happen. And let's face it, we all know that when you are disconnected and put on that mask, you can't do your best work. So it creates this low trust and low empathy and ultimately a low performance culture. So it's so important for us as leaders now to lean in more and be more exceptionally human, is realize that, at a distance, out of sight, out of mind. And so what can you do to close that gap and check in with people about how often should we be checking in? Some people, it might be once or twice a day. Other people are like, no, I'm good. Like once a month, I'm fine. It's different for everyone. I mean, all of this, the key with leading people is that everyone's different. And so we have to adjust our styles and approaches accordingly.
Yes. And they're also bringing in their emotion into the picture as well. The leader themselves.
Yeah.
I just recently interviewed the former COO of Skyport, and they went from 75 restaurants to one restaurant through COVID and 1,300 employees to 50. And we talked about this. And so, in the midst of that, he actually also lost his job. So he's got his emotions going on, and that's why I think they're leaders. When you talk about checking them at the door, I think that's an expectation for leaders that we put them on the pedestal and to say, you've got a responsibility to this organization. You need to get the results, whatever the results are, stakeholders you're accountable to. But, I don't want to deal with your stuff. I got enough of my own. And if you've got people saying that on both sides, then there's not going to be a lot of connection, and it's going to break down communication and certainly collaboration as well. So what do you recommend to the leaders that you work with in terms of how to manage their own emotions, the emotional intelligence? But emotional intelligence almost implies an intellectual, it kind of brings it back into
Yeah. Yeah.
how
No.
smart are you at that, you know, versus like, do you actually allow yourself to be human
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, I would say less emotional intelligence. Like, what are you doing for your own emotional health, frankly? And that
Yes.
I think that, frankly, and this is where I believe that all professional development and leadership development begins with personal development. So, do you have, you want to call it a support system or a court, or who are your go to people where you can just not have to wear that mantle of responsibility? Because let's face it, I don't want to bring everything to the people that I lead. I need to have a place to discharge what I call do my own work to keep myself emotionally healthy and do that work in a place that isn't going to have real world consequences. So whether it's I have a coach or a mentor or a trusted advisor or friends, but I do that work offline. I mean, I just think about, there's things about, I'll just take on a personal level. There's issues that I have with my wife and my kids. And, sometimes I have to bring it to a friend or a coach to be able to deal with that. Or, for some people, it might be a therapist. I mean, there's a lot of different support systems out there. But I believe that as leaders, we need to clean up our own house first, because otherwise we don't have space to hold the emotional needs and baggage of other people, because that's part of the job. I'm not saying you need to be a psychologist, but I'm saying just to be an empathic human, you need to have some space, right? You can't be so busy in your own, but this is going on. No, you need to clear that out and clean your own house so there's some space to allow other people to have stuff and you can support them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think everyone can be a leader?
That's a great question. So I think that everyone who wants to do the work and is willing to do the work can be a leader. And also, my definition of leadership goes way beyond position, job title, organization, professional. I mean, I think in life, any time that you are trying to influence anyone else, or frankly, even just yourself, to get something done, that takes leadership. And so, yeah, I think the world calls for you to lead somewhere almost every day. And so, yeah, I think everyone can be a leader. I think some people disempower themselves because they think, oh, I don't do that. That's not me, and so a big part of what drives me is I want people to get in touch with their own power and their own potential for making their own lives and their own communities and ultimately our world a better place.
Absolutely. Well said. I'll have you do my next update on my website for the for
There you
the
go.
description on leadership and what leaders of transformation is all about. But
It
seriously,
is though.
that's what it is. You create, people talk about wanting to do create transformation in the world, be the change in the world is what, Gandhi said, right? You
Oh
be the
yeah.
change and then it flows from there.
Yeah. Can I share one quick thing as you say that? You need to
Please.
be the change. So, there's so many pieces under connection, communication, and collaboration, but one of the pieces under connection is around credibility, right? And so how important it is that people believe who you are as leader, because if they don't believe you as the messenger, they're not going to believe your message. And in my book and in my teaching, I talk a lot about one of the most important thing, if not the most important thing you can do to be more credible is show up on time. Right? Because it's the easiest thing
Yes.
to measure is to own this. And I bring this up because as you're saying, be the change. When I first learned this lesson, and again, I learned this all from mentors of mine, and I would show up to things and other people would be late. Like, I'm here. Why aren't they? Like, I would get upset. Like, don't they? And you talked about modeling it. I realized I had this switch, and it probably was 3 or 4 years in. I realized I'm not showing up on time for them. I'm showing up on time for me because this is the kind of person that I want to be. So I think this is why it's so important for us as leaders to clarify our own personal values and then to work towards those. Because for me, if I know that what I'm doing every day is in alignment with who I am and what I'm here on this planet to do, I bring so much more energy to it and it enlivens and enriches me because I'm living literally on purpose, right? I'm on purpose. And so I think it's so valuable for us to do that work again, to clarify why, what's my why? Simon Sinek, start with why. What's our purpose? And so getting really clear is when you can do that, then you can focus your leadership efforts in the place that's going to make the most sense for you. And that ultimately is going to make the most impact on the world around you.
So good. When you said that about your motive, I thought, ooh, that you think of the distinction between good leaders and great leaders is their motive and why they do what they do.
Yeah.
Is the perspective that they're taking. Are they doing what they're doing to impress others, or are they doing it because that's who they choose to be? And I think of like thought leaders. There's so many people nowadays that are saying, I'm a thought leader, or I want to be a thought leader.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, having interviewed so many thought leaders,
Yeah.
none of which, by the way, ever called themselves a thought leader. They just do what they do because it's their curiosity, it's their desire to be the best at what they do, the best version of themselves, not in comparison to somebody else. And as a result of that, people like yourself, you know, that they want to learn from you.
Yeah.
They want to learn from you because of what you've discovered and who you are choosing to be. And it's a subtle distinction, but it's huge.
It is huge. And I think for me, the key to all of it, beyond clarifying what your mission and your vision and following that purpose, is then you've got to fall in love with the work, you know. And for me, the work, you know, external rewards and praise, yeah, it's nice, but I mean, just the work itself, I mean, that's whether it's shaping something I'm writing or helping someone. I mean, just to have someone say, hey, you know, I got an email the other day from someone in India, you know, I read your book and it really made a difference on how I think about connecting with my team thing. I mean, that just feels so great, right? Just like, to me, that's as good as, you know, anything else. I mean, all of it makes a difference. And the thing is, in this world, we can't control the outcome, but what we can do is focus on the process. I think falling in love with the process is so important.
Absolutely. Alain, this has been so good. Refreshing. It has been refreshing. I love talking about leadership with people that really get to the finer distinctions of what makes great leaders. And so thank you for that. I appreciate it. And for our listeners, I would encourage you to go get a copy of Alain's book, Cracking the Leadership Code. We'll make sure all the links are on the Leaders of Transformation website, leadersoftransformation.com. But yeah, you know, get a copy of his book, learn these 3 steps or these 3 areas, and really get good at it. Not because you're trying to impress someone else, but because you choose to be that type of leader in your own life. To Alain's point, you know, it starts with us in the leader that we are in our own lives, and then it spills over into our families and our workplaces and our communities. So I highly encourage you to do that. And so we appreciate you being here again. Alain, thank you so much. And I thank you to our listeners as well for being here, because this is why we do this podcast, is to be able to inspire you, to encourage you, to equip you to be the leader of transformation that you're capable of being. And so we'd love to hear your stories. You can find us, of course, on social or through our website, and let us know how you're creating transformation in the world, or how you are planning to create transformation in the world. And if there's anything we can do to support you along the way, you can let us know there. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.